Here is Van Dieman's Eggplant, a dark, rich tone of purple, very close to what we see in a swatch. And I will say this is a great color match for an eggplant. This is very consistent ink with no real tone shift as paper changes. And while it does shade well, the color is the real standout quality of this ink. On non-fountain pen friendly paper, it performs fair. It can get deep into the paper, but not deep enough to stop the use of the back of the page most times, and there's no major feathering issues. This is a great ink for a student note taker. I really enjoyed this, using this, and would be very happy to have a bottle of it. This might be on one of my favorite purples type lists if I did those types of videos.
The pen for today is a Mnemosyne Fission. Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how we got there by looking at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
A great purple on the page, looking the same as we saw in the, or will see in the swatch. I've seen it, you haven't yet. It doesn't feather, doesn't spread, it does shade. It shades well enough. I mean, you can spot it without any kind of problems, like on Not, on Therefore, even on Smaller that has smaller amounts of shading. It is the color that is really the greatest quality that we're getting here. Such a very nice purple. Looking at the back of the page, no bleeding and no ghosting.
Van Dieman's makes more than just this one ink. So let's take a look at a few other inks from Van Dieman's.
Here is Van Dieman's Enchanted Woods, a shimmering ink. Here is Van Dieman's Cradle Mountain Gray. Here is Van Dieman's Tasmanian Robin Pink. Here is Van Dieman's Hanging Lake.
The second writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather, does not spread, barely shades at all. Really, the possibilities are there, like possibilities on the third line where you see the T's at the end does get a little bit darker, but it is not the shading. Once again, it is the color that makes this ink so good. Looking at the back of the page, not a ghosting problem. None of the spots I'll point to. I'll even circle just to make a little more of a point out of them. There are a couple spots a little bit deeper. This would not stop you from writing on the back of the page.
There's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down to immediately put into water to show the separation of those colors making the ink. Now the one on the right is marked with a D. This is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's put into water. The third writing sample is done in a national brand Steno notebook.
Here the tone is slightly lighter and dustier than it is on the Clairfontaine. Dustier purple. Now, we do get tiny little bits of feathering that do show up occasionally. I think the tone of this is being altered by the paper, meaning while it is a darker purple, it is a little bit translucent. I don't have any kind of real spread, minor spread. The minor spread and the minor feathering together means I probably don't go to use this ink on this paper. Looking at the back of the page, the inky aggression is very visible, quite frequently all over the place. Now, none of it's going to bleed through to touch the page underneath. The ghosting's not the problem. The inky aggression is the problem. You're probably not writing notes back here, but given the slight spread and feathering together on the front, you're probably not writing on this paper.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, this smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. In the upper left, you can see where there is highlighter. In the upper right, that is pen flush. The lower left has a 1/3 bleach solution, and the lower right has plain old water. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather, does not spread, does shade almost as well as it does on the Clairfontaine. Look at even, mostly a nice lighter tone with a darker N at the end. That over here is a very dark H in the middle of the word. It stands out most prominently against this quad rule paper, making it a great ink to use if this is the paper you go for. Looking at the back of the page, there is some inky aggression getting deeper into the paper, never to the point of bleeding through to the page underneath. And in this case, with no ghosting, I don't think it would stop most people from writing back here.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at a few more violet or purple inks.
Here is Diatramentis Thomas Alva Edison Black Red.
Here is Noodler's Polar Purple.
Here is Pilot Mixable Violet. Here is Robert Oster Viola.
All of the inks that you just saw have a review here on the channel. Now, the next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. This paper normally makes something a little bit lighter, a little bit more muted or duller as a tone. It is not doing that here. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread. It does shade, though nowhere near as well as it did on the Clairfontaine. You can go find the shading for sake of doing it, but I don't think that's the thing. It stands out well against the quad rule. It looks great on the page. It is a very nice tone. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
While it's nice to see inks that are in the same color family, I prefer to find inks that complement the color on the page.
Here is Pelican Jade.
Here is Sailor Kobe number 46 Museum Gray.
Here is Diamine Pink Glitz. Here is Krishna Danu Udak.
The best way you can support this or any channel that you like watching is to alert the retailer of where you saw the product at time of purchase. Now, the last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
Here the tone is just a little bit lighter than it is on the Clairfontaine. We do not have a problem with feathering here. We do have a normal amount of spread for being on copy paper. We do get a couple tiny moments of shading, though really not anything stand out. This could be a good ink for this paper. Looking at the back of the page, not a ghosting problem, really an inky aggression problem. A normal level for copy paper. I think it stops you from writing back here, but it did not bleed through to touch the page underneath.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The medium flow broad of the Mnemosyne Fission gives a perfect eggplant purple with some shading. Off camera, I tried this in a wet fine, and it was completely unchanged in performance. Now, I would call this an obvious dealer choice. No matter what pen you choose, you will get a little bit of shading with this eggplant purple. So go ink up that favorite pen and enjoy.